Do you have dead end leaders? I mean, I know you've got them because every church does. And here's the reality, you might actually be one yourself. And I'll be honest, I have been one too many times in my ministry. In this video, I'm going to show you why your church may be struggling to multiply leaders and how dead end leaders are probably at the heart of the problem. First, what I'm going to do is explain what a dead end leader actually is. Second, then, I'm going to talk about the consequences of having a church that is filled with dead end leaders. And then third, how to reverse that trend. In other words, how to build a culture where leaders actually multiply more leaders. And then as a bonus, I'm going to end with, it's going to be the single most important step to actually fix this. And it's the one that most leaders tend to avoid. All right. Let's jump right in. What is a dead end leader? So I'm actually going to start with what they are not. You see, most of the time, dead end leaders are actually not bad leaders. On the surface, they may lead quite well and be incredibly valuable to your church and the ministries that they lead. As a matter of fact, they might be what you would consider your best leader, except for one problem. You see, the problem with dead end leaders is that they have no plan to multiply themselves. That's the definition of a dead end leader. Let me say it again. They're leading with no plan to multiply and raise up the next generation of leaders. All right, now let's talk about the 7 consequences of having a church that is filled with dead end leaders. The first consequence, number 1, is this: a leadership vacuum. You see, when dead end leaders step away, there's no one who's been specifically trained and equipped and experienced to step in. That creates a leadership vacuum. And so growth will stall, the ministry is slow, and sometimes opportunities are missed. If you've experienced this type of leadership vacuum, then maybe this is a wake-up call that you have dead end leaders. You have a culture of dead end leadership because you too frequently see someone step down and there is no one ready to take their place. All right, let's talk about the second consequence of a dead end leader. It's what I call paid staff dependency. You see, when dead end leaders step out of a ministry, guess who gets the responsibility of raising up that new leader? It goes right back to the paid staff. And maybe this has happened to you. You've handed off ministry leadership. It seemed to have gone well, but the leader steps away. And instead of someone prepared to continue it from within, you have to start all over again to recruit, to train, to equip, and to place a new leader for that particular ministry. This is contrary to the model that Paul gives Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, which he says, "And what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." That's why I got this baton behind me. It's a reminder that if I've done my job multiplying leaders, they will sense the responsibility of passing on what they've learned to the next generation and the next generation. You see, ministry will then not be limited by how many paid staff there are, but how effectively a church is multiplying leaders. All right, the third consequence of having dead end leaders is leading people in a ministry instead of leading people into ministry. You see, leaders need to do both, and it's what Jesus did. On a couple occasions, Jesus led a ministry of feeding tons of people, 5,000 people, then 4,000, and he employed his disciples in this ministry. He led them in a ministry, but he didn't stop there. Take a look at Matthew 10. These same disciples were led into ministry. He cast the vision. He said, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." Then he modeled it. He equipped them. He shared with them what to expect. He sent them off. He brought them back and talked about their experience. And he celebrated with their wins. He was leading them into ministry. All right, the fourth consequence of dead end leaders. It's what I call new leader growing pains. Dead end leaders are not multiplying themselves, right? So when new leaders have to step into a leadership vacuum, they're missing the invaluable experience of on-the-job training. So naturally, there's going to be some hiccups. Now let's look at the biblical model. We should not be surprised that Peter and John were such good evangelists right from the beginning of the church. You see, Jesus multiplied himself in them, And even the Jewish leaders recognized it. Acts chapter 4, verse 13 says, "Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and they perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus." You see, Jesus poured himself into them. So then, when it was their turn to lead and to be evangelists and to lead the church, they were ready. They had on the job training. All right, number 5, the fifth consequence of a dead end leader for your church: slower growth. Okay, so what is one of the most common ministries that pastors long to grow and multiply? It's small groups. What is the greatest barrier? It's the lack of leaders. And it's because current leadership, for one reason or another, have not been raising up the next generation of leaders. So growth is naturally slowed. Number 6, consequence of a dead end leader is the inhibition of fresh ideas. Let me explain. Yes, you might have an incredibly creative dead end leader with all kinds of brand new ideas. That's not what I mean. What I mean is this: when new leaders are raised up, they bring fresh ideas, new perspectives, therefore, new approaches, new concepts, maybe even new methods. Let's talk about the 7th consequence of a dead end leader. That is dependence on importing leaders. You see, imported leaders come from the outside. They are trained elsewhere by someone else, making you dependent on other churches and other leaders. But what if your church became one that exported leaders instead? This would lead to the kingdom growing and expanding. Exported leadership, i.e., sent leadership, is the way of Jesus. If you want to see a great example of this, take a look at Acts chapter 13, 1 through 3. At first, new leaders were imported into the church at Antioch. Barnabas grabbed Paul and said, "Hey, let's go invest in this church." That's what happens in chapter 11. But then when we get to chapter 13, we see the evidence of many gifted and equipped leaders. Multiplication of leaders had taken place. So then what do we see next? The Holy Spirit says to the church at Antioch, "Send Barnabas and Saul to multiply disciples and churches, exporting and sending leaders, and expanding the kingdom." Isn't that what we long for? So then how do we create a culture of leadership multiplication? How do we reverse this trend? What can you begin to do if you see this culture in your church? Number 1 is this: cast the vision for multiplication. Vision casting takes place through language and stories. Language communicates. Therefore, develop language that reflects your values and priorities, like multiplication. Use it often, illustrate it often, celebrate it often. For instance, maybe something like this: every worker has a partner, every leader has an apprentice. See, that communicates vision and expectation. Number 2, decide to multiply everything. Intentionally strategize to multiply everything you do. If you have one service, consider what would it take to add another service. It's going to take more leaders and more workers. So why not start before the need ever arises? If you have 5 small groups or 10 small groups, consider what it would take to develop 5 more or 10 more. If you've got 5 elders, consider what would it take to develop 5 more. Multiply everything. To develop a culture of leadership multiplication, number 3, develop and implement a picture of a discipled leader. This is incredibly practical. Create a list of what you would want your leaders to look like, both specifically, in other words, specific to their area of ministry, and then generally, in other words, across the board characteristics no matter where they serve. Let me give you an example. Okay, this is a specific one. And I'll use someone who is leading children's ministry. See, they would need to know some things like how to teach biblical concepts to various age groups. That's part of your specific picture of a disciple leader. But your general description, or maybe universal picture of a disciple leader, should always include for leaders the expectation of raising up new leaders. Have a plan for what that looks like. All right, number 4, to create a culture of leadership multiplication, create a ministry community. Imagine the synergy of a community of leaders gathered together, sharing a common vision, being equipped, encouraged, challenged, exhorted, praying for one another, and celebrating what God is doing. You see, having this type of community allows you to minister to and disciple leaders according to their specific needs and maturity. And personally, in my 40 years of ministry, this type of community has always been my favorite. But I have a story to tell. I remember at my most recent church where I served doing all of these things. I would cast the vision for multiplying small groups and leaders. I talked about the importance of multiplying everything. We were part of a church planting network known for multiplying churches. This, of course, requires leadership multiplication, and there was great buy-in. I created a picture of a discipled small group leader, for instance, that include investing in and raising up apprentices and new leaders. I created a leadership community that included all the elements I mentioned earlier. And when it came to our small group leaders multiplying themselves, no one did it. Why? You see, I had wrongly assumed that those small group leaders had experienced it and had it modeled to them before I came. But multiplication was only talked about and it was not modeled. You see, they needed to see it and experience it. So, what is the single most important thing you can do to create a culture of leadership multiplication? You must model it. If you don't want a culture of dead end leaders, then you can't be a dead end leader. You must intentionally invest in a few to reach and impact the many. Yes, this step is probably the most costly and hardest of all that I've mentioned. But if you want to see not only leadership multiplication, but effective disciple making and a disciple making culture within your church, you must begin with yourself. You must be a purposeful leader, a multiplying, disciple making leader. See, we can help. I'm with Make More Disciples and Navigator Church Ministries. And you see, what we do is we partner with church leaders to help them grow an intentional disciple making culture within their church to transform their community. So reach out to me. My contact information is below, or go onto our website and you can learn more about us, our approach, and what it might look like for us to come alongside you and your team. And of course, you can begin this journey of being a disciple making, purposeful leader by watching and applying these 3 videos. So click on this one to get started. Until then, hey, let's make more disciples.